Linux Peter Conference year 17. My name is Vasily Tolstoy and I'm a member of the programming committee of the conference. And I'm here with Mr. Tycho Andersen. Tycho.
Hello.
We have talked the same format last year, but still, because of the fresh video, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Tycho Andersen and I'm a container hacker from Denver, Colorado. And some other thing.
And I understand that you work for Docker.
Yes, that's also true. I work for Docker.
A container hacker working for a container company.
Yeah.
which makes you just the model guy in this sense. You are giving a talk at this conference. Can you compress it just 100 times and tell what it was about?
Sure. There's sort of two halves of it. The first half, or the first part of it, was about the Moby Project and sort of what that is. I think there's a lot of curiosity around what the Moby Project is. And so the first part was just sort of explaining that. In a nutshell, the Moby Project is the tool that is used to build the Docker binary. It's the thing that merges SwarmKit and LinuxKit and all of these things into the final version of Docker that people run on their systems. And then the second half was more of just a fun thing where I went through a number of container escape mechanisms and how containers protect against this today, or container engines protect against this today. So, yeah.
Great. The usual but still interesting question for our viewers and listeners. What do you think? What interesting had happened last year?
In the last year, in containers, or
what do you consider interesting? It depends.
Yeah, so I guess for me personally, interesting features that have landed, like, for example, one of the big pain points for containers and just generally figuring out about security is when seccomp denies something, sometimes there's no way to tell that what happened, and you have to go maybe dig through dmessage or something, but oftentimes it's not even there. And so there was a set of patches that landed, I think in 4.14 maybe, or I think it's 4.14, that you can log. There's a new seccomp logging feature, so that you can explore exactly what happened, which is, so these kinds of introspection things, like for example the eBPF stuff got a lot, but the logging has gotten a lot better. So these tools are all there, but they're much easier to debug now from user space, which is cool. Other things that happened, there's a patch set that landed for user namespace file capabilities. So you can write, like, this, ping program gets capnet raw from a user namespace, and so that is necessary because if you're running things in a container that are just like distro packages or whatever, they do some install and it tries to write capnet raw. It's to a setfs cap. Before this was not possible. The kernel would just give you an EPRM, but now it is. So there's a lot of work still going on, I think, in terms of just adding containerizing features. Yeah.
Okay. And what do you think? It is a quite subjective, personal thing. What do you think? Is there any hype around currently? Something which everybody have listened about, and says, oh, it's a new great thing.
Kubernetes, I think, is
Kubernetes.
Yeah, I think that's, at least for me, that's, in the container world, that seems to be the thing that's getting the most hype. Is just the orchestration platform, basically.
So you're not alone in this opinion that Kubernetes is new hype.
Yep.
And going in a bit not the technical direction, the community, I mean the Linux community, speaking general, it's getting older.
Yes.
And probably the few years around this year, it seems quite obvious. What do you think? What are the implications of that? What would be the result of that?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, the community, I think, tries to. There's a lot of the community receives a lot of flack for being mean, and so I'm sort of a young kernel developer. I think my first ever kernel patch landed in 2015, but so I've been working on and some other things more recently. That's like more core kernel stuff, and I haven't necessarily experienced the meanness, but also, maybe it's just certain people or something, and I'm not contributing to those parts of the kernel. But anyway, I feel like there is an influx of new people like myself who are sort of beginner or intermediate kernel hackers, and I guess hopefully the maintainership process will flow down to people. I think it's sort of unfortunate because it doesn't actually sound like that fun of a job, because you don't ever write any code, you just look at everyone else's code. So I myself would not be very interested in this, but some people like that. So I think it's clearly getting older, but hopefully there's some fresh blood that will take over. I don't know, we'll see.
And probably you just need to be old and mean to be a maintainer.
I think so, yeah.
In a sense.
Yeah, I think I smile too much to be a maintainer, maybe. I need to adopt some more Russian.
You need to think about your manners if you want to some career.
Yes, exactly.
In this area. And what do you think? Is there any need to special activity to bring new people in the community?
I think there is a lot. So there's the kernel newbies mailing list, which is pretty active. And there's actually just recently a friend of mine who's a very newbie kernel hacker gave a talk about how he got into kernel development and like his process. So I think there is a lot of outreach going on, but there's I don't know, this is maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I was at a conference and I saw Linus give a talk, he does the sit-down question and answer thing, and he basically said some people shouldn't be kernel hackers, like either they're not good enough or they're not careful enough or whatever. So it's it's a sort of thing where you want to do outreach, but also like people need to be careful, and there's a lot of things to think about, and so some people either don't want to be that careful or whatever. So I think there is outreach going on. I don't know. I guess is that.
Great. See, probably you're the right person to ask the following question, which I have up my sleeve. You're the one who get the proper formal education in computers.
Yes.
So what do you think? What is the right, probably not career, but education path, in a sense, for the guy who wants to do things like you do, for example?
Yeah, it's a good question. I had a little bit of an unusual path because originally I was going to get a PhD and be an academic, and then I sort of realized in the middle of it that that was terrible, and so then I left graduate school and sort of became an academic. My graduate school experience was very good, not necessarily because of the courses that I took, but because of the people that I met. So I learned, in particular, there's like 3 or 4 people that I became very close with that I maintain friendships with, even though we all live in different cities now. And I learned pretty much everything I know about how to do low-level hacking from those people in graduate school. So in that sense, it was useful, but it wasn't really the school part. It was just meeting the right people part. And so if you have a way to do that that's not school, good. You should just go do that, I think. I think degrees are, it's like one thing. There's some companies, I guess bigger companies, that probably have some rules about, we only hire people with these degrees, but I myself have only worked for startups where nobody really cared that I, wrote a paper about abstract algebra when I was getting my master's degree or whatever. Like that doesn't matter to anyone. So I guess the most important part is like your network, and if you have a way to create that network without an education, then it's fine. But for me, my education was really how I formed the first parts of my professional network and learned the skills that I use every day today. So does that answer your question? Maybe.
Little children, please study. Mr. Andersen told you so.
Yes.
I noticed that you have changed the company from last time.
Yep.
from Ubuntu to Docker, which for some, again, our less experienced, especially Russian viewers, sounds like, I have changed my Ferrari to Maserati. The reason was because it's stupid red. Can you, if it's possible, comment on that? Why you change it?
Sure, yeah. I have been, like I said, I started my first kernel patches in 2015, and I basically just wanted to work more on the kernel, and Docker was had a position where it was more kernel focused and less user space focused, and so I made a switch to focus more on the kernel, and so Docker has been very good to me in terms of letting me sort of learn. In particular, I've been working on a kernel hardening patch set to protect against an attack. The abbreviation is XPFO. I think if you type this in Google, you'll find it. That stands for Exclusive Page Frame Ownership. But basically, it's a clever use of, there's lots of hardware protection in ARM and x86 about user and kernel pointer overwriting. But this attack is basically built on the insight that there's a probabilistic way to use the fact that physical memory has aliases in the kernel to exploit things, bypassing all of these existing checks in hardware. And so I've been working on that, but I didn't know, like, the memory management part of the kernel is obviously quite complicated in a very hot path. So there's a lot of optimization and a lot of context to learn, and so I've been kind of just absorbing that over the last 6 months, and Docker's been very nice in terms of letting me do that. So
I can hear that you got an interesting job, at least.
Yeah. It's been very good. So and it sounds like Canonical is now interested in having container kernel people to work on this sort of thing. So
a lot of people do. But it looks like now we've already understood at last that it's possible to do your own container system, and ours should be better than Speaking about learning, what source of material, a book, blog, a video blog, whatever, just a person you need to closely look at, what kind of source information would you recommend to definitely have you put your hands on, fix, and understand at least?
Yeah, so I actually, this is going to sound weird, but I've never read a book on programming, ever.
I did.
I mostly either write or read code. Some resources that are some lists that I subscribe to. The Linux Foundation, it's, I think, not very well known, so maybe it's a good forum to tell people. The Linux Foundation runs a container-specific mailing list about kernel patches. And so all container-related kernel patches, well, not all of them, but some non-zero amount are CC'd to this list. And it's not the fire hose that is drinking from the fire hose that's LKML, because you cannot read every message on that list. But the containers one, there's another one that I've been working on recently that's the kernel hardening mailing list, which has to do with sort of kernel security and protecting the kernel from attackers and things. So these smaller lists, there's FS-DELL. The more narrow focused lists are a good place to learn about kernel stuff. But also just sit down and write the code. Like, if you have, people ask me too, like, how do you get started in kernel development? And the way I got started was I had a problem that there was no way to solve. And so it was like, one day I just decided, today I'm going to write a kernel patch to solve this problem. And you write the patch and it takes you a few hours, and then you have to spend the next 6 months getting it in, getting reviews. Ultimately, we did 3 major redesigns of that patch set, and it went to 15 versions. So yeah, so there was a lot of work there, but you have to start somewhere, and so reading the code and is I think the best way.
And you have partially answered this question already, but if let's imagine that the people who consider starting to contribute to Linux or to just start to work in tech and in free software are all behind this camera and eagerly looking at you and waiting for your wise word, what can you say to them?
Well, so the first open source project that I ever was really the first project that I was ever appointed a maintainer of, that I ever made a significant contribution to, was a window manager. And I basically, there's like i3 and Xmonad, and there's another one called Qtile, which is the one that I was a maintainer of. And the reason that I was appointed the maintainer was because nobody else was doing it. And it's kind of a, there's maybe 1,000 users of this thing in the whole world. Like, it's not that popular. But it was just interesting to me, and so I started working on it, and I learned a lot of stuff about X and those details. So I think the strategy to get involved in open source is, especially if you're a programmer, find some project that you use or you think is interesting, and then almost certainly that project has bugs. Or
yes.
If you try and use it and you're like, I really wish it did this or whatever, just write that code to do that. And every community I have ever been a part of, and even the Linux community, has been pretty friendly in terms of, especially if you, rather than file an issue, if you send code, like patches, everyone's like, whoa, this is amazing. So if you take the time to sit down and write some code and fix a bug or write a new feature, I think people are very interested in that sort of thing. So I guess the easiest way is just find something that you use that's
so don't complain, fix the stuff.
Yes.
It's the usual.
Yeah.
And basically it's probably like Linux formatted.
Exactly, yes, yeah. And another thing is, once you're in it, you find like other stuff to do. So you're in this code and, okay, now I've learned a little bit more about this, and I wish it did this too, and this is actually a much bigger feature, a much bigger rewrite. So you just have to get started, basically. That's the hardest part. And the easiest way to do that is to, they say, scratch your own itch. People get annoyed with stuff, and then you fix the stuff that annoys you. So.
And scratch.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.